Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Dave Rowan, and here happy to represent both Morrow and Entrusted with tonight's webinar. And Morrow, again, is an emphasis on a human-first approach to financial planning and retirement planning, and Entrusted planning encourages clients to start with their why before deciding on the how in terms of their estate and financial plans. So here's session 2 of our webinar series, which is Reclaiming the Cost of COVID. And here I am again, Dave Rowan, your presenter for this evening. Last time we talked about why all of us might be feeling uneasy about our money these days, how major spontaneous purchases can really be disruptive in terms of your personal finances, and maybe taking a little bit different look at those. And then how small money vampires can nibble away at your savings. And today, we're on a much more ambitious agenda. Got a lot more ground to cover tonight. So we'll be looking at the benefits of budgeting, and then defining what a budget is and what it isn't, outlining some guiding principles for you in terms of budgeting, taking a quick look at budgeting statistics in the United States, and then finally immersing ourselves in 5 different budgeting methods. So the benefits of budgeting, there are many. You genuinely get to see how you're parting with your money, and also be able to make trackable changes in how you're spending and saving, because we can't really measure what we don't track. And so if you don't have a budget, it's very hard to understand what's going on. It allows you to think through your goals, both short-term and long-term financial goals, and align your spending with them. Every single budgeting method that you'll see tonight starts with thinking about your goals. Some more tactical things: you can eliminate high interest debt and be able to move past making minimum payments on your credit cards and eventually eliminating that debt permanently. Setting an example for your kids. If there's a lot of money drama in your house, or scrambling to find money to pay for things that come up, this is a great way to set a great example for your children. And sadly, budgeting and money management is not taught in our schools. So as parents, we're it in terms of teaching this. You can approach everyday decisions with a lot more confidence. You have a plan, you know what's in the budget and what isn't, and it's really a great psychological benefit to just get rid of all the queasiness and second guessing when it comes to your spending, and you just know, again, that it's aligned with your goals. You're prepared for emergencies. You're not running around like crazy when the car breaks down or a medical expense comes in, the roof starts leaking. The money is there in the form of an emergency fund that you've put money aside in as a part of your budget. You can free up money for investments. And so instead of just living paycheck to paycheck, you're actually putting money away for your future and enjoy the benefits of compound interest over many decades. And then finally, you can look forward to a financially secure retirement, with the majority of your time being spent on things that are fulfilling rather than continuing to figure out how just to pay the bills. So we have a quick poll question here tonight. We're testing our polling capability, and it's very simple. And I hope it's popping up here. Our moderator already popped it up. And so you can go ahead and submit your answer, which is, do you currently use a budget? Yes or no. You can just check one of these and then press submit in the lower right. And once we have a reasonable number of everybody's responses, I think our moderator will be able to put up the percentages, and we'll compare that later when I put up some statistics related to budgeting. So if you could, please go ahead and answer that polling question up. There we go. Okay. You currently have a budget? Yes, 83% said that they do. And no, 17% said no, they do not. So terrific. A lot of people in here are budgeting. That's wonderful to see. Okay. So we'll compare that to national averages later. So what is a budget and what isn't it? Oh, and by the way, also, I'm going to go fairly quickly through a lot of the material tonight because we have quite a bit to cover. But if you do have questions, I know sometimes it's not comfortable to just start, blurting things out in a group setting here. So I'll also be monitoring the chat. And if you do have questions, you can certainly type them into the chat. and we'll get to them as they come up through tonight's presentation. So what is a budget and what isn't it? So, a budget is supportive of your short-term and long-term financial goals. It's a tool to help guide spending and saving decisions. It should work for you. So it should be something that's easy to use, easy to understand, and gives you actionable information instead of just numbers on paper. It should be something that fits within your schedule. So if you can afford 30 minutes a month to do on this kind of activity, there's budgets that fit within that. Or if it's something you can spend more time with, up to 3 hours a month, it can fit in that window as well. And then finally, again, there's all of the benefits that we talked about earlier, and it helps you feel good and confident in the spending and saving decisions that you're making. And then what isn't it? It should not be something that requires many, many hours each month and requiring you to track each expense down to the penny. It should not be inflexible. And so as you learn about your spending and saving habits and potentially your goals change and evolve, your budget should evolve too and be something that continues to be useful in those future states that you find yourself. And then finally, and I think that every time people hear, I know when I first started hearing the word budget, it had a negative connotation for me. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend hours on this and I have to think about every penny I spend, and I'm going to feel guilty every time I pay for something. And maybe it will be that way initially, but eventually what you'll find is it's very liberating. Going back to, again, having a plan, knowing what's in the budget, having it be aligned with your goals, and each time a bill comes in or something unexpected happens, you have a plan for it. And it takes all of the guesswork and all of the guilt out of spending. Okay, guiding principles for budgeting. So start with why. Why are you doing this? This is not just for the sake of putting numbers on paper. It can be, again, very tactical. You want to get out of credit card debt. You want to eliminate other forms of debt like student loans or a home equity line of credit. Maybe you want to help save for a major purchase. Maybe it is saving for your children's college. Again, going back to the psychology here, eliminate how you're feeling about spending money currently, or change how you're feeling from guilty and uneasy to confident and assured. And then again, shift your mindset in terms of money from a lack mindset and I'm living paycheck to paycheck and not really sure where the money goes, to an abundance mindset. I know what's coming in, I know what's going out, I'm saving each month, and it can genuinely shift how you feel about money. I would absolutely take an experimental mindset to budgeting. We'll go through a number of different methodologies as part of our presentation tonight. And then finally, and I can't emphasize this last bullet enough, be sure within your budget to include a category that's labeled something like self-care or splurge or me, whatever it is. It is something that anytime that you spend money in that category, it is completely guilt-free. And it doesn't matter what it is, but it is something that is for you and improves the quality of your life. Any questions at this point? Again, you're welcome to type them into the chat. And I'll keep going here. So some quick budgeting statistics. According to last year in June, conducted by the Penny Hoarder, which is a great website, by the way, for people who are just getting started with budgeting, 55% of respondents do not use a budget. So this group here is well above the 45% average, which I love seeing. The study also revealed that people have some challenging habits around money. About a quarter of us say that we've hidden a purchase from a significant other in fear of how they'd react. About 20% of people say they've splurged on a purchase, and then it's caused a strain on their ability to pay their daily bills or monthly bills. Interestingly, 59% of Americans view themselves as savers, while 45% or 41% describe themselves as spenders. And then finally, in terms of savings and credit card debt, 22% of Americans have less than 5,000 in credit card debt. About half have no credit card debt, and then about 8% carry a balance between 5,000 and 10,000. Now, how do people budget? And we'll go through a number of these methods. We'll see how many we have time for. About 40% use a spreadsheet, 17% use what's called a zero-based budget, and again, I'll explain that later. About 14% of us are using a budgeting app. 12% follow the cash envelope method, which is really interesting, and there's several different ways to use that. And then 7% use the 50-30-20 method. Okay. So budgeting methods, we'll get to each of these in turn. We'll start with the spreadsheet method. And this is a great method if you're not terribly tech savvy, you don't want to be linking accounts and looking at your phone all day long, figuring out what you're spending. You want to customize the spreadsheet instead of using somebody else's system to meet your unique goals and circumstances. And then finally, you use a lot of cash for purchases. And so that's not always as easy to track within app-based budgeting, and it's very easy to do within a spreadsheet. And you'll see here throughout the remainder of the presentation, I talk about resources that are available. And we will have a list of these at the end of the presentation, and our folks at Morrow will be mailing or emailing these out as a resource list to each of you who have attended this evening. So nerdwallet.com offers a wonderful directory of spreadsheet templates, and it can be found at the link, again, that will be at the end of the presentation and emailed out to all participants this evening. So first step is to determine your income. And we're looking at that from all sources. So your primary job, any bonuses, gifts you receive, if you have a side business, tax refunds, or any one-time or irregular income. Next, list your expenses. This can be challenging. It's not just what comes in any one month, but we sometimes have to look out beyond that. So the first step is to review credit card and bank statements. You'll definitely want to do a look back of at least 3, if not 6 months, to include things that don't happen each month. Sometimes insurance bills aren't monthly, other things. Think through things that happen once a year, like HOA fees or license and registration renewals, and then decide how specific or detailed you'll be. Will you list individual subscriptions like Netflix, or will you lump them all together? Will you break out specific hobbies or combine them all into entertainment? And you can, again, make it a tool that works for you. And I see we have a question in the chat. So the question is, how important is it to know how much you spend in each category versus just knowing how much you spend in total? That is a great question. So, and again, that's an individual preference. Some budgets are predicated on knowing exactly what you spend in each category, and that takes more time to do, but also offers you the most actionable information. Versus other people are just looking to take a very top-down view of their spending. So for example, if you're about to enter retirement and you've never done a budget, and you're trying to understand how long what you've saved will last into retirement, you need to know how much you're spending each month. And so it would be perfectly acceptable simply to calculate the total that's coming in and at least do a rough calculation to see where you stand in terms of retirement. And then from there, you can decide how granular to get. So again, great question. Thank you for asking it. Okay. So, and here's some sample expenses to think about. This is far from a complete list, and obviously these numbers will be different for everyone, but you can just get a flavor of the kinds of expenses that you would put into budgeting with a spreadsheet. Now there's steps beyond this, and I'm going to cover those in the next budgeting method, which is zero-based budgeting. And with zero-based budgeting, it's a very simple approach. It's great because it allocates every dollar. And so again, if you need this level of specificity to truly get a handle on what you're spending and saving each month, this is a great way to go. And it truly helps to align your spending with your goals. Let's talk about how it does each of these things. Again, same as before, we're looking at all sources of income. We're listing expenses. It's the exact same slide as before. We don't need to review this. Same story here, sample expenses. And now let's go into what makes this zero-based budgeting. So let's set some goals. And we want to determine how much we want to allocate toward various goals each month, including paying off credit card debt, other forms of debt. Maybe you want to put $200 a month aside for an emergency fund. Maybe you're setting aside $200 a month for your kids' college, and maybe $100 a month for a future vacation or major purchase. So not only are you allocating into spending buckets, but you're also allocating into these savings or goal-based budgets or paying down debt budgets, or buckets rather. And then we're prioritizing. And so among all of the categories that you have come up with, allocate what's essential for you to live, food, clothing, and shelter. Next, allocate money to your financial goals. So again, going back to the previous slide, each of these areas and making sure that they're fully funded within the context of what you want to do in each of them. And then finally, allocate what's left over to truly discretionary. And once you've filled here fully and here fully, this is where it might require some stretching and really deciding what gets funded and what doesn't. Once you're done here, look at it holistically, decide, does this picture genuinely reflect what I want to do, both in terms of my goals and my discretionary spending? Adjust and finalize each of the spending buckets. And then you have your zero-based budget. And so then finally, you zero it out each month. And so you compare your total average monthly income to your total expenses. If after you've done this exercise, you have a few extra dollars left over, sprinkle them across the categories that matter most. And then if you're short on dollars, decide which categories to trim back. And so, and I guess I'd say also, this is important, which is, and it's common. Sometimes you go through this exercise and it's like, oh my gosh, I want to spend $1,000 more a month than I'm making. And so it's not a good idea to just start rolling into the month after month with that kind of a gap, but think about proactively what you intend to do to change that, either in terms of reallocating or potentially seeking other sources of income or other things to close that shortfall. And then finally, you definitely need a buffer account with this kind of a system, because not only are you actually spending money by sending it out the door to pay bills, but you're also funneling money to paying more than the minimum on various forms of debt, doing electronic transfers, sending it over to an emergency fund, or sending it over to some other type of sinking fund for a major purchase. And so there will be some months that you'll overspend because, again, you're doing these things, and also sometimes bills come in a little higher. So you just want to make sure that you have enough money in your checking account or a separate account that you can pull over and cover any shortfall. Okay, and so that is zero-based budgeting. There's a couple of great resources from pennyhoarder.com, step-by-step instructions on how to create a zero-based budget, and a really great 1-minute video tutorial on the same subject. Next, we'll move on to budgeting apps. This is great. These are great to use if you're totally new to budgeting and want suggestions on how to set it up. This will give you a very detailed look at how you're spending in each category. And it's also great if you can and are willing to take the time to connect bank accounts and credit cards so that your expenses automatically flow into the budgeting application. There are many different apps to use. Mint is the gorilla in the space. Almost half of users are using it. 17% use every dollar, 8% use envelopes, and then 4% use YNAB, you need a budget, 3% at personal capital. And again, you can tinker with a number of these to see which one works best for you. If you want to do a little bit of research beforehand, you can check out this article from the College Investor for a review of 13 different budgeting apps. And There are freebies out there that you can use for free. Some with all the bells and whistles, you'll spend a little over $10 a month or $150 annually to run those apps. Okay, so those are budgeting apps. And again, if any questions come up, you can send them into the chat. I'm happy to answer them. The cash envelope method. This one is a really controversial budgeting method. And it can be very challenging to implement on the front end, but very rewarding in what it ultimately does for you as a budgeting technique. So this is a great choice if you've tried things in the past, they haven't worked, and continue to struggle with credit card debt or just overspending in general. Many of you have probably heard of Dave Ramsey. He's pioneered this method, and he is probably the most popular and famous money coach out there these days. And it's the kind of thing that, many people talk about it as you have to use this method for all categories that make sense. But in my opinion, you can even just track some categories that might be problem categories, and we'll talk about that later. But the bottom line is, for any category that you're tracking in this space, you have to spend, you can only spend cash in that category. No credit cards, no Venmo, no Cash App, no applications or credit cards can be used when you're spending in an envelope category. We'll talk about that in detail here. So at the start of the month, you decide how much money goes in each envelope, and it's based on, again, the categories that you set up in advance. So let's say, for example, you want to budget $200 each month on entertainment. So you have an envelope marked entertainment, you put $200 in cash in it at the start of the month, and you get to, let's say it's February, let's say you get to February 24th, and you spent the last dollar out of that envelope. That's it for entertainment. No more till March 1st. And so that's the essence of the system. Again, you can decide whether you're going to use this in many categories or only 2 or 3 problem categories. Of course, you're only going to use cash where it makes sense. You're not going to be running around trying to make a mortgage payment or credit card payments or pay utility bills out of envelopes. It just doesn't make sense. And finally, again, this is another one of those points I can't emphasize enough. If you find yourself needing to use this method, there is absolutely no shame in having to do this. I personally know of households making multiple 6 figures of income who have finally adopted this method and finally, for the first time in their adult lives, truly gotten a budget in place that gets the spending where it needs to be, and again, allows them to achieve their goals and achieve financial peace. So there is no shame here in using this method. I see another question in the chat. Great question. What if your spouse isn't on board with budgeting? So, this is one of those things where something is better than nothing. And so even if your spouse is not on board initially, we can only, and this is just true of life in general, we can only control what we can control. And sometimes there's factors that we can't control. We can't control the weather, and sometimes we can't control a spouse in our household who isn't on board with this. I think that, it becomes a situation of leading by example. And I've seen many instances where one partner embraces this in a relationship and then starts to be able to achieve some of their goals with paying down debt or being more comfortable with decision-making. And eventually, in most cases, the other spouse comes along for the ride. And, both out of respect for the spouse who's trying to make a difference in this area, but also seeing the positive benefits. So again, great question. Thank you for asking it. Okay. So within the cash envelope method, you can choose any budgeting style. It can be zero-based budgeting, 50-20-30 method, or again, selective envelopes just to cover a few categories. These are sample categories that people sometimes have problems with: weekend adventures, maybe a little bit too much on ride sharing, restaurants and bars, clothing, hobbies. It really depends on what's unique to you. And then again, just the basics of the methodology. Each month or each time you get paid, visit the bank or the ATM and withdraw enough cash to fill all of your envelopes. The method is only as good as you make it. And so, if you're running out of money on the 15th of the month and then reaching for the credit cards, you may as well not be doing the method. And so, even if you have to leave the credit cards at home temporarily to have the ability to stick to this, it would be helpful. You can visit Dave Ramsey's website. He gives a very detailed explanation of the envelope method. And then you can also visit Amazon.com or other retailers. They have wonderful, fancy envelope organizers to get you started. And so we are only 3 minutes away from the close of this. So I think we are going to either defer this method or not talk about it at all. I will just say at a very high level, this is a great method to take a very top-down approach to budgeting, where you allocate 50% of your money to essentials, 20% to savings, and 30% to personal expenses, and then allow things to float within there. And as long as you're staying within those pools, you're living within the 50-20-30 method. I do see another question in the chat. Okay, we've got, how should I think about adjusting my pre-retirement budget to account for a different lifestyle in retirement? Great question. So there's a couple of things, which is, and again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but the first is to think through what your goals are likely to be in retirement. And if they're dramatically different from what you're experiencing while continuing to work your full-time job, it's in those areas that you can then begin to not only adjust spending proactively, but also remember when we were talking about the zero-based budget, and you can set goals. So you may start to save for some of these goals that you have in retirement. Maybe it's the vacation that you've been waiting for forever to take. Maybe it is, really amping up and enjoying a hobby that you've only been able to spend, a couple hours a month at, to something that's much more meaningful. And so, I know some people that transform their properties into just wonderful outdoor oases. And so starting to save for something like that. So it's really a great time, a few years before retirement, to really think through again what your goals are projected to be and start adjusting not only spending but saving accordingly. So great question again. Thank you for asking it. Okay, so we're rolling right past the 50-20-30. And as I said, we have this whole big long list of wonderful links and resources for you to use if you want to try any of these methods or have questions about them coming out of the webinar this evening. And finally, we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time this evening. And just a preview of session 3, which will be on February 24th. We'll talk at that session about the notion of taking your money on a date, or some people call it having a money summit at least once a year. Because again, money is like a relationship, and if you don't spend time with your money or spend time in a relationship, it probably won't go very well. And so that's a little preview on that topic. We'll talk about a framework to use for making major purchases. And then finally, we'll leave time at the end as an open forum to answer questions from any of the webinar sessions that we have conducted over these last few weeks. So thank you again for attending this evening. And don't worry if you either came late or didn't show up at all, which maybe you're listening to a recording, but absolutely Maura will send out a recording and a summary of the session via email. So again, thank you, and please join us for part 3 on February 24th. Oh, we have one more question in the chat. Oh, just a compliment. Thank you very much. Awesome, great content. So thank you all very much for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Take care.